Have you ever had to play peacekeeper in your household?
They say the worst kind of hurt doesn't come from strangers. It comes from people who've memorized your birthday, know exactly how you take your coffee, and still don't show up when it matters most. That was the kind of hurt I swallowed the day I told my family I'd been chosen to pitch my startup at a regional showcase in Boulder. Not a job interview. Not some seminar or motivational workshop. A real pitch with real investors, real judges, and real opportunity. It wasn't even a long shot. I had been selected from nearly 300 applicants. But when I told them, standing at the kitchen island with my heart cracking through my chest, their reaction wasn't silence out of shock or pride, it was silence out of disinterest. My mom looked up from stirring the potato salad and nodded like I'd just told her I had a dentist appointment. Rachel didn't even let me finish the sentence before jumping in with news about her dog, Biscuit. Apparently, she'd booked a custom cake shaped like a bone and hired a professional photographer. The party was set for the exact same Saturday. As if the world revolved around that damn dog's gluten-free, peanut butter-based birthday celebration. I remember standing there, feeling like I was trying to sell a miracle to people who only believed in tradition. I repeated myself, something I hadn't done since I was 11, and forgot my lines in a school play, thinking maybe they didn't hear me. "It's a regional startup competition," I said again, slowly, deliberately, looking around the room. "It's kind of a big deal. Winners get funding. Real funding. I've been working on this app for over 2 years." I waited. There was a pause, not awkward, not dramatic, just vacant. Then my dad, still in his work boots and grease-stained jeans, muttered, "Well, that's great, Jess. But I promised Rachel I'd help set up the table Saturday." I felt my face grow warm, not out of anger, but embarrassment for ever expecting more. You know what's funny? My family isn't made of bad people. They're just painfully consistent in how little they expect of me. I was always the quiet one, the steady one, the one who didn't make a fuss. Rachel was the explosion. They expected her to shine, to win, to get applause. Me? I was the good girl, the one who didn't need support because I handled things. And maybe that was my fault, too. Maybe I let them forget I had dreams that didn't fit into polite dinner conversations or holiday catch-up texts. That night, after pretending everything was fine, I went home and opened the group chat. There it was. Rachel had already started a countdown for Biscuit's birthday in there, sending pastel graphics, RSVP requests, even a menu. I scrolled in silence, the screen's cold glow flickering across my face while the pitch deck sat unfinished on my desktop. My app wasn't flashy, wasn't some TikTok gimmick or trendy crypto nonsense. It was built for people like my dad, construction workers, freelance tradesmen, day laborers, people who needed accountability from their employers. A job log, time tracker, payment record keeper, all in one. Not sexy, but honest. And I believed in it because I'd watched people like him get stiffed on wages for decades. I sat back, staring at the RSVP list, and saw that even Aunt Carol was flying in from Phoenix for this dog. And they couldn't drive 45 minutes to Boulder to see their daughter, niece, and sister try to change her life? So I said nothing. No announcement on Facebook. No guilt-tripping text. I just booked a cheap room in Boulder, printed my pitch materials, and packed a carry-on bag like I was sneaking off for a crime instead of a dream. On the morning I left, I passed by Rachel's house. It was already decked out in gold and white balloons. A damn inflatable arch stood in the front yard with a sign that read, "Biscuit turns 2." And I couldn't help but laugh, not a happy laugh. A laugh that got caught halfway between my stomach and my throat, because if I didn't laugh, I'd scream. That night in the motel, the walls were thin, and I could hear a couple arguing next door over whether to order room service or just sleep. It made me weirdly nostalgic for my own version of comfort. No matter how flawed my family was, I still missed them. But I also knew that if I failed tomorrow, no one would even notice. And if I won, no one would believe I did it without them. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing my pitch like it was a confession. I imagined the judges sitting there, suits pressed, pens poised, ready to poke holes in everything I built. But I wasn't scared of them. I was scared of going back home empty-handed and hearing Rachel say, "Well, at least Biscuit had a good day." Because that's what it came down to. Either I show up for myself, or I disappear in the shadows of other people's expectations forever. I zipped up my presentation board, double-checked my slides, and set 5 alarms on my phone. I knew I wouldn't sleep. But I also knew this. They might not believe in me, they might not even see me, but tomorrow, someone would. Or I'd make damn sure they regretted not trying. And in that moment, I wasn't angry. I was focused. That quiet kind of rage that settles in your bones, not to destroy, but to build something no one can ignore. Something they'd have to look at. Something they couldn't explain away with a party hat and a peanut butter biscuit. Somewhere between the drive out of Denver and the first turn off the I-25, as the city started shrinking in my rearview mirror and the brown hills of Boulder began to swell like shoulders shrugging off the morning fog, I started to realize that this wasn't about the pitch at all. Not really, and maybe it hadn't been for a while. This wasn't about my app, or the prize money, or even the judges. It was about all the times I had told myself to be patient, to keep my head down, to let others take the spotlight because their needs seemed louder, flashier, more urgent than mine. It was about sitting quietly through years of being overlooked and having to pretend like I didn't mind when, deep down, I was collecting every instance like stones in a backpack, dragging behind me the weight of their doubt and the sound of my own silence. The motel room smelled like lemon cleaner and something older, maybe mildew, maybe memory, and as I set my bag down next to the twin bed with its plastic comforter and sad little floral print, I suddenly remembered a birthday party from when I was 9. The year Rachel got that Barbie-themed bash with 30 kids and a backyard clown, and I got a sheet cake in the kitchen with Happy Birthday Jess spelled wrong in blue icing. That was the same year I learned to cut my own slices. My mom said, "You don't want to be greedy." But Rachel had 3. That moment had stayed with me, not because I cared about the cake, but because it was the first time I realized being quiet meant being easy to forget. And here I was, nearly 3 decades later, still asking for a seat at the table while everyone else was feasting at the buffet of approval. They weren't bad people, I reminded myself again, even though that mantra was starting to wear thin. They just believed what they'd always believed, that Rachel needed the praise, the attention, the affection, and I needed, what? A pat on the back and some vague nod toward resilience? They loved me, sure, but love without recognition feels a hell of a lot like being tolerated. I spent that Friday evening sitting cross-legged on the motel floor, index cards spread out in front of me like playing pieces in a game I wasn't entirely sure how to win. My laptop was propped up on a pillow, and the screen glowed with my final slide, bold white text on a dark background. Work done right, paid right, tracked right. I said the words aloud. Then I said them again. Then I started pretending I was on stage, pacing from the mini fridge to the nightstand, answering questions no one had asked yet, imagining skeptical eyebrows and the sharp sound of pens scratching notes I wouldn't be allowed to read. And somewhere around the 5th run-through, I stopped thinking about Rachel's dog. I stopped thinking about my dad's shrug, my mom's silence, Aunt Carol's plane ticket for a poodle's party. I thought only about the app, about the men and women who lived paycheck to paycheck and never knew if that check was actually coming. I thought about every voicemail my dad ever left cursing some boss who shorted him, and how my app would track hours, log task details, create digital proof of work completed. No more, he said, she said. Just facts. Clean. Simple. Truth on record. Still, when I lay down to sleep, with my blazer hung neatly on the closet hook and my pitch deck saved in 3 locations, I couldn't stop the ache that curled in my chest like a question I didn't want to ask. What if I won and it didn't matter to them? What if success tasted like cardboard because I had no one there to taste it with me? I didn't cry, though. I'd done enough of that already, and there's something about being disappointed for the 100th time that makes tears feel like a waste of water. Instead, I stared at the ceiling tiles, counted the dots like constellations, and remembered the time Rachel screamed at our mother because her prom dress came in the wrong shade of pink. I'd gotten my junior year dress from Goodwill and smiled anyway. In the morning, just as I was zipping up my bag, my phone buzzed. It was the family group chat. A video had been posted. I tapped it with a dry finger and watched as Rachel, dressed in matching lavender with her dog, held up a tiny crown and placed it on Biscuit's head while everyone cheered. My dad was there. My mom too. Even my cousins, laughing in the background, holding themed cookies shaped like paw prints. I watched until the video looped back to the beginning. Not a single message had been sent to me. No, good luck today. No, how's the pitch going? No, thinking of you. Just glitter and dog cake and paper hats. I turned the phone over, screen down on the counter, and told myself that I was done needing them to notice. It was a lie I'd told before, but this time it felt sharper. Not a bitter kind of sharp, but the kind that slices the rope you've been hanging onto and dares you to see if you can fly without it. And maybe that's what I needed. Not support. Not validation. Just the space to finally choose myself over people who had made it clear over and over again that I was always going to come second to something louder, flashier, or more photogenic. Even if that something was a dog wearing a tutu. So I squared my shoulders, picked up my bag, and walked out of that motel with a stomach full of caffeine and steel. I didn't know if the judges would care about my story. I didn't know if the investors would see potential in my stripped-down idea. I didn't know anything for sure except this. I wasn't pitching for money. I wasn't pitching for attention. I was pitching for every single time someone told me I was just being dramatic, for every time I swallowed a dream instead of chasing it, for every little girl who grew into a woman that everyone assumed would stay in the background. And whether they liked it or not, this time, I wasn't backing down. The conference center looked less like a place where dreams could be made and more like a converted car dealership with clean carpets and too much air conditioning, the kind of building that pretends it's more impressive than it actually is, which, in a way, felt poetic because that's exactly how I imagined most of the people walking through the front doors felt, shiny on the outside, practiced smiles, fast-talking resumes, but underneath it all, just terrified individuals hoping someone important would say yes. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, holding my registration badge in my hand like it might disintegrate, breathing through the stiff anxiety building in my shoulders, trying not to feel small in a room full of people who looked like they'd already been chosen before the competition even began. There was a man in a bright blue suit, phone tucked between his ear and shoulder, barking phrases like scalability and burn rate, while tapping a pen against a branded water bottle. Next to him, a woman in heels that probably cost more than my entire outfit stood rehearsing her pitch into a voice memo app, mouthing words with the precision of someone who'd practiced in front of a mirror for weeks. A group of 3 young guys in matching black hoodies clumped together at the corner of the lobby, clearly part of some tech incubator, speaking in a strange language made of acronyms, venture buzzwords, and inside jokes that kept the rest of us at arm's length. I found my assigned table, number 21, near the back of the room where the lighting was just dim enough to make you feel a little less visible, and I sat down, careful not to bump the table tent that read, Jessica Colton, TaskRight. The name of my app looked so plain compared to others nearby, names like PulseIQ, WorkWave, Tasklify, all trying to sound sleek, disruptive, futuristic, while mine sounded like something printed on the side of a toolbox. But that was the point. I hadn't built it for people who gave TED Talks and brainstormed over oat milk. I'd built it for the kind of men who woke up at 5 in the morning, packed their lunch in plastic grocery bags, and hoped that when they clocked out at the end of the day, someone would pay them what they'd earned. The first round of presentations started around 10, and I watched them with quiet interest, partly out of curiosity, partly to understand the landscape I was about to step into, and partly because I was looking for proof, any proof, that someone like me, without a team, without a PR deck, without a logo designed by an agency in Brooklyn, could still stand a chance. Each pitch was slick, well-timed, full of confidence and phrases that made heads nod. Predictive modeling, user conversion, seed-ready. They had data, graphs, testimonials, and pre-recorded videos showing app interfaces I could tell had been built by teams of 10. I had slides I designed in Canva, and a prototype I'd coded myself between shifts and weekend coffee-fueled marathons. I didn't feel inadequate. I felt real. And real, in that room, felt a lot like raw meat dropped into a sea of polished knives. When my name was called, it didn't feel like a spotlight moment. There was no music, no hush over the room, just a woman in a beige blazer reading from a list and motioning toward the stage like she was calling patients at a clinic. I walked up with the kind of careful steps you take when your nerves don't trust your legs, gripping the clicker in my hand like it was the only thing keeping me from floating straight out of the building. The projector screen blinked to life behind me, and I began, not with flair, not with some clever hook, not with a story about how I pivoted out of finance to find my passion, but with a question. What if your dad worked 10 hours a day for cash, and the guy who hired him decided not to pay? I paused. Not dramatic. Just long enough for the silence to settle. Mine did. More than once. And he wasn't the only one. I walked them through the app, not with tech jargon, but with use cases, real names, real scenarios. I showed how it logged hours, stored client details, created a shareable record of work completed. No fluff. Just function. I could feel them listening. Not all of them, but enough. One judge, a man in his late 40s with a weathered suit and the kind of tired eyes that suggest he's seen a lot of bad ideas, leaned forward, not much, but enough for me to notice. Another, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a tighter mouth, asked questions that weren't just polite, they were surgical. "What's your retention strategy for non-digital native users?" she asked. I answered honestly. A physical user guide in every download email. Voice tutorials. Big buttons. Simple UX. Not everybody scrolls like a 20-year-old. She nodded once. I didn't know if I was winning, but I knew I wasn't failing. And that was enough to keep my voice steady, my pacing smooth, my hand from shaking too obviously. I ended with the tagline I'd scribbled into a notebook one night after watching my dad yell into the phone with a drywall contractor who forgot to send the check. Work done right, paid right, tracked right. And then I stepped off the stage, heart hammering against my ribs, unsure whether I wanted to scream or sleep for 3 days. Back at my table, no one clapped. That wasn't how this kind of thing worked. It wasn't high school theater or graduation. This was business, where applause was replaced by eye contact and approval came in nods and follow-up emails. Still, as I sipped lukewarm coffee from the conference urn, I caught that same judge, the one with the tired eyes, glancing toward me, expression unreadable, but his fingers drummed once on the folder in front of him. A rhythm. A signal. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. And then, almost as if to remind me where I stood, my phone buzzed again. Another update in the family chat. This one a selfie of Rachel with biscuit in front of a balloon arch spelling out "Best Boy Ever." I didn't open it. I just locked the screen, slipped the phone back into my bag, and let it sit there, quiet, heavy, irrelevant. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about how they saw me. I was thinking about how I was starting to see myself. And, honestly, I liked her better. The air in the motel room that night felt thicker than it had any right to be, heavy not just with humidity or leftover scent from industrial detergent, but with a strange stillness that settled over me once the adrenaline of the pitch began to drain from my system, replaced by something slower, quieter, and far more insidious than nervousness. Doubt, not loud or dramatic, but creeping in around the edges of my thoughts like water seeping through a crack in the wall. I sat on the bed, legs curled underneath me, staring at the motel's generic wall art without really seeing it, while my laptop rested beside me, still open to the same folder where my pitch deck had lived for weeks, perhaps even months. Each revision saved with a timestamp as though documenting a slow climb up a mountain no one else believed existed. I had done the thing, stood up there under those 2 bright lights, spoken clearly, answered the questions with the calm I barely felt, smiled when it seemed appropriate, and refrained from apologizing for taking up space. But even as I replayed the moments in my mind, the judge's nods, the lack of visible disinterest, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I had still fallen short, not because the product was flawed or the delivery was weak, but because I wasn't polished enough. Wasn't shiny enough. Didn't have a co-founder with a beard and a buzzword-laced elevator pitch. Didn't come from Stanford or wear shoes that cost more than my entire rent. I had brought my best to the table, and now all I could do was wait, not knowing if it had been enough or if they would walk away forgetting my name the moment the next slick young founder stepped into the room with his army of acronyms and startup swagger. My phone buzzed again, twice in quick succession, the telltale vibration of group chat activity, and I didn't even need to look to know exactly what it would be: more photos, more stories, more celebratory nonsense from the poodle party, where everyone I had ever called family had decided to gather, not for a milestone, not for a wedding or funeral or holiday, but for a dog's birthday. I knew there would be balloons and cake and coordinated outfits because Rachel didn't do anything halfway, and I could already imagine her voice in the videos, bright, performative, the kind of laugh that's meant for an audience rather than spontaneous joy. I didn't open the notifications. I simply turned the phone over again, letting the screen face the nightstand, as though by denying it my attention, I could somehow punish it for reminding me of what I already knew deep down but hadn't wanted to admit: they had chosen something else over me. Not once, not by mistake, but consistently, repeatedly, as though their dismissal had become habit and my absence had become invisible. When I finally drifted into sleep sometime past 2 in the morning, it was the kind of rest that feels less like restoration and more like temporary paralysis, dreamless, directionless, a body shutting down out of necessity rather than peace. I woke around 7, the cheap wall clock ticking too loudly, and I reached for my phone out of instinct, expecting more photos, more smiling faces under strings of fairy lights and happy birthday banners. But what I found waiting wasn't from the family chat. It was an email. Subject line: "Congratulations, Jessica, you're a finalist." For a long moment, I just stared at it, not touching it, not opening it, just letting the words sink in, doubting them even as they lit something inside me I hadn't felt in years: validation, sharp and sudden and terrifying. Because it meant I wasn't crazy for believing I had something to offer, for pushing forward when no one else had bothered to clap or care. My fingers finally moved, clicking the message open, and there it was in black and white. I had made it to the final round. My pitch had been selected, and I was invited back to present again, this time to a full panel, with more time, more eyes, more at stake. I should have jumped up. I should have shouted or at least smiled. But instead, I just sat there, the emotion too complicated to name, tangled in a strange mix of pride and sorrow, because the first person I wanted to tell wasn't anyone in the chat thread, still sending dog photos. It was my dad. The man who had inspired the whole app, who had once told me he trusted cash more than contracts because paper can lie, but time doesn't. And yet, he had chosen to stand next to a cake shaped like a bone instead of beside me when I tried to build something in his name. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell any of them. Not then. Not in a message, not in a call, not even in passing. I simply packed up my bag again, ran a brush through my hair, and walked out of that motel room with a silence that felt far louder than any speech I could have given. I didn't do it out of pettiness. I did it because I needed to know that, if I won, it wasn't for them. Not to prove anything, not to change their minds, not to finally earn a place at a table that always seemed to be too full for me. I needed it to be mine. The final event was held in the same building, but everything felt different, more formal, more focused, more filtered. The room was colder, the lighting adjusted, and the judges sat in a straight line this time, nameplates in front of them, folders opened, pens ready. The audience behind them had tripled. I could see journalists, a few venture reps, and people I didn't recognize, but who had that practiced look of professionals trained to sniff out either genius or nonsense within 60 seconds. When they called my name, I walked up calmly, without notes this time, without slides. I had them on standby, sure, but I decided in that moment to speak directly, plainly, and honestly. I told them what I built, why I built it, and who it was for. I told them about my father. The cash jobs, the late payments, the endless fights over hours worked that no one had tracked. I told them that dignity wasn't just about getting paid, it was about knowing your labor meant something, that your sweat didn't evaporate into someone else's profit. I didn't dress it up. I didn't pretend to be something I wasn't. And when I was done, I thanked them quietly and walked off, heart steady, back straighter than it had been in years. I didn't expect what happened next. Not applause. Not an email. Not a polite follow-up. I expected nothing, truly, because that's what I had been trained to expect. But when the lead judge stood and walked over to the mic, His words landed in a voice that felt like a final punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I'd been writing for half my life. "Our winner today," he said, without pause, "is Jessica Colton." And, just like that, it was mine. But as I walked up to receive the certificate, the trophy, whatever ceremonial object they had prepared, I realized there was something more powerful I could do than simply say thank you. I stepped up to the mic, looked straight into the crowd, and paused, not for effect, not to draw attention, but because I needed to breathe through the moment, to ground myself in it. Then I said it slow, firm, clear. They told me this wasn't worth the trip. They had a dog party to go to. So this one's for me. No one else. And somewhere I hoped that message would ring louder than any bark, louder than any balloon pop, louder than a lifetime of being ignored. The thing about triumph is that it rarely feels the way you imagined it would in your loneliest hours of grinding towards something that no one else believed in, not because victory isn't sweet, but because by the time it arrives, you've been carrying the weight of silence, dismissal, and private battles for so long that the wind doesn't burst like a firework in your chest. Instead, it settles in quietly, like an old friend you forgot was coming, laying a hand on your shoulder and reminding you that yes, you endured, and no, you didn't need them to clap to prove you were worthy. I stood there on that small stage, the clapping politely subdued but unmistakably genuine, my name printed in block letters on a foam core certificate that didn't look like much, but carried the kind of validation I had stopped hoping for years ago. And in that moment, just for that moment, I felt a stillness inside me that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with power. I held the mic in both hands, not out of nerves, but because I needed to anchor myself, to ground every ounce of energy I had left so I could say what needed to be said without flinching, without sugarcoating, and without retreating into the quiet version of myself they had all come to expect. The room was still, the judges watching with passive interest, the attendees half-shuffling programs into their bags, but I didn't care who was distracted, who was listening, or who would post about it later. I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for me. And so I said, as evenly and clearly as I could, they told me this wasn't worth the trip. They had something more important to do. A dog's birthday party. And they were right about one thing, this wasn't worth the trip. It was worth everything before the trip. Every moment I stayed up after work fine-tuning the code. Every time I pitched this app to a blank wall because no one else wanted to hear it. Every version of me they ignored while celebrating someone louder, shinier, easier to love. This one's for me. No one else. There was no standing ovation. No movie-ending music. Just a pause. A heartbeat of silence. Then a few claps. Then more. I stepped down with the certificate pressed to my side, my jaw tight, my heart surprisingly steady. And as I passed by the side doors of the auditorium, my phone buzzed again, this time not with another family photo or dog party update, but with the name Rachel. The screen glowed with her incoming call, and I stared at it for 3 full rings before I pressed accept, not because I owed her anything, but because I needed to hear what someone who had chosen a party hat over my future would say when the outcome didn't bend her way. Her voice came through small and choked, almost hesitant, like she'd been crying or running or both, and for a moment I didn't recognize the sound of guilt in her throat because I had never heard it before. "Jess," she said, "why would you say that? In front of everyone? Mom's upset. Dad's. I don't know. Embarrassed. You made it sound like we don't care about you." I didn't laugh, not because it wasn't funny, but because laughing would have broken the dam that held back every inch of fury I had spent a lifetime filing away under the label of forgive and forget. Instead, I answered with something far colder, far simpler, and far truer than she had probably expected. "You don't get to be upset that I finally told the truth after years of pretending everything was fine just to make you feel better about ignoring me." She fell quiet. Then came the second blow, the one I always knew would come when people like Rachel were forced to face themselves without the cushioning of praise and celebration. "I didn't know it mattered that much to you," she whispered, and with those 8 words, she confirmed everything I'd always feared, that my value to them was invisible unless I screamed, unless I begged, unless I caused a scene. I wanted to yell, to throw the phone, to demand an apology not just for yesterday or for the dog party, but for every birthday I spent alone, every achievement that was met with a polite nod, every time I had to pretend I wasn't hurt just so they wouldn't feel guilty. But I didn't. Because I had already won. And not just the competition. I had won the moment I chose not to tell them about the pitch. I had won the moment I showed up in Boulder alone and left with something no one could take from me. I had won when I said what I meant without apologizing for it. And more than anything, I had won the moment I realized that I didn't need their approval to make my life meaningful. So I told her, with a voice so calm it probably sounded terrifying to someone used to my compliance, "I'm not doing this for you." I never should have. I hung up before she could say anything else. I didn't block her. I didn't send a follow-up text to soften the blow. I didn't even open the group chat that was now surely spiraling with damage control, half-hearted justifications, and tepid attempts at rewriting the narrative to make my words sound like an overreaction rather than a release. I simply turned my phone off, slid it into my backpack, and walked 3 blocks through the cooling evening air until I reached a small cafe that hadn't yet closed, where I ordered coffee and sat down at a corner table with a view of the mountains. The paper certificate lay folded in my bag, and my laptop sat open again, not with slides this time, but with my app's final codebase, ready to be uploaded. And I did it, not with fanfare, not with a press release, not with a post thanking everyone who had believed in me from the start, because the truth was, very few had. I uploaded it because it was time. Because the world didn't need to clap before I moved forward. Because I didn't need a ribbon around it to know it had value. When the upload bar hit 100%, I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of the coffee, and felt, not relief, not celebration, but something deeper, like the exhale that comes after holding your breath for years without even realizing it. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe the app would take off. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe I'd get calls from investors. Maybe I'd get silence. But for the first time in my life, the outcome didn't define the meaning. The process, the effort, the persistence, the clarity, that was the win. And it was mine. As I walked out into the night, lights flickering to life in quiet windows, the buzz of traffic thinning into a gentle hum, I felt no urge to return a single call, answer a single message, or explain myself any further. They could make their peace with what they heard, or they could ignore it just like they always had. Either way, I was done asking. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some wounds don't require closure. And some victories are quieter than expected, but no less real. I didn't go back to the motel that night. I didn't go home either. I booked a room in a different city, just far enough to make the point, just close enough to still see the mountains when I woke up. This wasn't their story anymore. This one was for me.